The bride was supposed to say, "I do," but when the cowboy asked for her hand, she broke down in tears, and he noticed the one thing everyone else missed. Clara stood frozen inside the small wooden church, her bouquet trembling as the minister waited. The candles flickered, the floorboards creaked, and a single tear fell before she could speak. The cowboy beside her didn't see a reluctant bride. He saw a hidden wound. Then he quietly asked, "Who hurt you?" But the answer she carried could change everything they thought they knew. Stay with us and share your thoughts as the story unfolds. The winter of 1883 had not yet arrived in Bitter Creek Valley, Colorado, but the mornings already carried a sharpness that warned everyone it was coming. The mountains stood quiet beyond the town, their peaks covered in a thin layer of white. The dirt roads were hard from the cold, and the wooden buildings along Main Street creaked whenever the wind pushed through the valley. Bitter Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew when a stranger arrived, especially when that stranger came by train with a single leather suitcase and a wedding dress folded carefully inside. Clara Whitmore stepped down from the passenger train just after sunrise. For a moment, she remained still on the platform. The train behind her released a long breath of steam, covering the station in a white cloud before slowly pulling away toward the east. Clara watched it disappear until the last sound of the wheels faded into the distance. In her hand was a worn leather case. Inside were 3 dresses, a small sewing kit, a family Bible, and a few letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Everything she had left. The journey from Tennessee had taken days, long days sitting beside strangers, sleeping against cold train windows, and watching the landscape change from green fields to endless plains. She had imagined this moment many times, the moment she would arrive in Colorado, the moment she would meet Benjamin Carter, the man whose letters had crossed hundreds of miles to reach her. His words had never been romantic. He had not promised grand things. He had written simple sentences. "I own a ranch outside Bitter Creek. I work hard. I need someone who understands that life is built one day at a time." Clara had respected that honesty. After losing nearly everyone she loved, honesty felt safer than promises. At least, that was what she had believed. The small wooden church stood at the edge of town, its white paint faded by years of wind and sunlight. Inside, the townspeople gathered quietly. They had come to see the woman from Tennessee. They had come to see the bride of Benjamin Carter. Ben stood near the front of the church. He was tall, wearing a dark wool coat and a clean white shirt beneath it. His boots were polished, but still carried traces of ranch dust. His hands showed years of work with horses, fences, and rope. He was not the kind of man who filled a room with words. He filled it with presence. When Clara walked down the aisle, every sound seemed to disappear. The wooden floor creaked beneath her steps. The sunlight coming through the church windows touched the edge of her simple dress. Ben watched her carefully. Not because he doubted her, because he noticed things, the way she held her shoulders too straight, the way her fingers tightened around the small bouquet in her hands, the way she looked toward the door for half a second, as if some part of her expected someone else to walk through it. When she reached him, Ben offered his hand. Clara looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold. The minister began reading the vows. The room remained still. "Do you, Benjamin Carter, take Clara Whitmore to be your wife?" Ben answered without hesitation. "I do." Then the minister turned toward Clara. "And do you, Clara Whitmore, take Benjamin Carter to be your husband?" For a moment she said nothing. The silence grew heavier. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. Clara looked at Ben, but she was not seeing the man standing in front of her. She was seeing a different day, a different promise, a different voice telling her that everything would be all right. Her breath became uneven. The bouquet slipped slightly in her hand, then a tear fell. One tear, then another. The church became completely silent, Whispers moved through the room. Some wondered if she regretted the marriage. Others wondered if she had changed her mind. Clara lowered her eyes. She seemed embarrassed by the tears more than anything else. But Ben did not look disappointed, did not step away. He did not ask her to explain herself in front of everyone. Instead, he quietly turned toward the minister. "We can wait a moment." His voice was calm. The minister nodded. Ben guided Clara away from the center of the room and toward the small side hallway near the church door. The cold air slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. Clara wiped her cheek quickly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Ben looked at her. "For what?" She hesitated. "For making a scene." Ben studied her face. "Clara, I have seen storms tear apart fences. I have seen horses afraid of their own shadows. A woman shedding tears in a church ain't something to apologize for." She looked away. Most people would have asked questions. Most people would have wanted an explanation. But Ben simply waited. After a long silence, he spoke softly. "Cha." She looked back at him. His gray eyes held no anger, no judgment, only patience. "Who hurt you?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not, "What is wrong with you?" Not, "Why are you crying?" Not, "Do you still want this marriage?" Who hurt you? For the first time in a long while, someone was asking about the wound instead of staring at the scar. Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had stitched clothes for neighbors, the same hands that had cared for people when they were sick, the same hands that had packed her entire life into one suitcase. She began, then she stopped. The church bell outside rang once, a reminder that time was moving. Ben did not push. "We don't have to finish today if you aren't ready." Clara looked at him. "You would do that?" Ben nodded. A promise means something. It shouldn't be something someone feels trapped inside. Those words stayed with her, because that was exactly what she feared. Not the marriage, not the ranch, not the unknown land waiting beyond the mountains. She feared being trapped in another promise that someone else could walk away from. After a few minutes, Clara returned to the church. The ceremony continued. No one spoke about the tears again, but everyone noticed the way Ben stood beside her, not in front of her, not above her, beside her. By afternoon, the small wedding gathering had ended. The townspeople returned to their homes. The horses were hitched. The wind carried dust across the empty street. At Carter Ranch, Clara sat quietly inside the small guest room prepared for her. The house was simple, a wooden table, a cast-iron stove, a few shelves, nothing extravagant, but it was clean, it was honest. Ben placed her suitcase near the bed. "I'll let you settle in." Clara nodded. "Thank you." He turned to leave. Then he noticed something, a small piece of paper sticking out from the side pocket of her suitcase. He did not mean to read it, but the edge had already unfolded. It was an old letter. The paper was worn. The ink had faded. Ben looked away at first, then one sentence caught his attention. Not because he wanted to know her secrets, because the words sounded like pain. Written across the page was one line: "You should never trust a man who promises forever." Ben stood quietly beside the suitcase. Outside, the Colorado wind moved through the empty fields, and for the first time since Clara Whitmore arrived in Bitter Creek, Benjamin Carter understood something. The woman who came to marry him was not running toward a new life. She was running away from something that had already broken her. Benjamin Carter carried that thought with him long after the lanterns in the church had gone dark. The old letter stayed in his mind, not because he wanted to uncover Clara Whitmore's secrets, but because he understood the weight of words written by someone who had been hurt. Ben knew what it was like to carry something nobody else could see. The next morning, Bitter Creek woke beneath a pale Colorado sky. A thin layer of frost covered the wooden fence posts around Carter Ranch. The horses breathed white clouds into the cold air, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen before sunrise. Clara stood near the stove, watching the water begin to boil. She had woken before anyone else. Old habits followed her wherever she went. Back in Tennessee, she had risen early to mend clothing before neighbors arrived. She had learned that a person could control very little in life, but they could always choose whether they would meet the morning standing or sitting. When Ben entered the kitchen, he stopped for a moment. He had expected uncertainty. Instead, he saw Clara placing 2 cups on the wooden table. "Morning," she said quietly. Ben removed his hat. "Morning." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, it was simply unfamiliar. Ben sat down and wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Clara noticed the small scar across his knuckles. A rancher's hands, hands that built fences, repaired saddles, and carried heavy things without complaint. "You don't have to work in the house if you don't want to," Ben said. She looked up. "I thought that was why you needed a wife." Ben leaned back slightly. "I needed a partner, not someone to disappear behind a stove." The answer surprised her. Most men she had known spoke about a wife's duties. Very few spoke about her choices. Before Clara could respond, the sound of boots approached the porch. The door opened. Samuel Carter stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He was younger than Ben by several years, with the same sharp eyes but a quicker temper. He glanced at Clara, then at his brother. "So this is the woman everyone in town is talking about." Ben's expression changed slightly. "Samuel, I'm only saying what people are saying." Clara lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them again. "I imagine people have plenty to say about a woman they have never met." Samuel looked surprised by her calm answer. He had expected anger. Instead, she returned to pouring coffee. That bothered him more. A person who fought back was easier to understand than a person who refused to be shaken. Later that morning, Ben showed Clara around the ranch. The Carter property stretched across open land between rocky hills and dry grass fields. The barn stood near the southern fence line. Beyond it were the horse pens, a small storage shed, and the creek that provided water during the warmer months. "This is a lot of land," Clara said. Ben nodded. "It was smaller when I started." She looked at him. "You built all this?" "Most of it." There was no pride in his voice, only fact. That afternoon, Clara noticed a mare standing alone near the far end of the barn. The horse kept shifting its weight and pulling away whenever someone came close. "That one's hurt," Clara said. Ben followed her gaze. "She's been like that for 2 days. Why haven't you treated her?" "I tried." He paused. "She won't let anyone near." Clara walked slowly toward the animal. Ben watched carefully. The mare raised her head. Her ears moved back. But Clara did not rush. She simply stood there. Minutes passed. The wind moved through the barn doors. Finally, Clara extended her hand. The horse stepped closer. Ben remained silent. He had seen experienced ranch hands fail with that animal. Yet Clara stood there, as if she understood something nobody else had noticed. After checking the injury, she returned with warm water and clean cloth. Ben watched her work, not like someone watching a stranger, like someone trying to understand a mystery. "You know horses," he said. "A little." "A little?" She smiled faintly. "My father taught me patience. Animals usually notice when people don't have any." Ben looked toward the mare, then back at Clara. "Why do you always help things everyone else gives up on?" The question caught her off guard. Her hands stopped for half a second, but she only lowered her eyes. "I suppose I know what it feels like to be left alone." Then she returned to her work. Ben said nothing, but he remembered those words. Days passed. Slowly, the ranch changed. Not dramatically, small things. A clean cloth appeared over the kitchen table. The empty shelf near the window held a few books. The house began to carry signs of another person living there. Ben noticed every detail. He noticed how Clara always folded the blankets neatly, how she saved the last piece of bread for whoever came home late, how she never complained when the wind found its way through the old wooden walls. But every time he tried to ask about her past, something closed behind her eyes. Then one evening, Samuel found something. A newspaper clipping tucked inside an old book Clara had brought from Tennessee. It mentioned a man named Thomas Bell, a former fiancé. Samuel carried the information to Ben. You need to know. Ben looked at the paper. What exactly am I supposed to know? That she was promised to someone before you. Ben folded the paper carefully. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe not. Samuel hesitated. But maybe she didn't come here because she chose you. The words stayed between them. That night, rain moved across Bitter Creek, the kind of rain that turned dirt roads into mud and made the ranch grow quiet. Ben stepped onto the porch before midnight, and there she was. Clara sat beneath the covered roof, holding something in her hands, a small, worn piece of cloth, something that looked like it had been kept safe for years. Ben did not speak. He simply stood there, and Clara slowly looked up. For the first time since arriving at Carter Ranch, she looked like someone who was tired of carrying a secret alone. The rain continued falling over Bitter Creek Valley. It tapped against the wooden roof above the porch, steady and quiet, filling the spaces where words had been missing. Ben remained a few steps away. He did not move closer. He had learned something about Clara in the short time she had been at the ranch. She needed room, not because she wanted distance from him, because she had spent too long with people who took without asking. That belonged to someone? Ben asked gently. Clara looked down at the small piece of cloth in her hands. It was faded from years of being folded and unfolded. The edges had been carefully repaired more than once. Her thumb moved over the stitching. My mother made it, she said. Ben nodded. He waited. The rain fell harder. Inside the house, the old stove gave a soft crackle as the fire burned low. You don't have to tell me anything tonight, he said. Clara looked at him. Why not? Ben rested his hand on the porch railing. Because I know what it's like when someone asks a question before they are ready to hear the answer. Those words made her look away. For several moments, only the rain spoke. Then Clara stood. I think you deserve to know why I cried. Ben did not answer. He simply opened the door and let her walk inside first. The kitchen was warm compared to the cold porch. Clara sat near the stove. Ben poured fresh coffee into 2 cups. It was a small habit she had noticed. Whenever something difficult happened, Ben made coffee. Not because coffee fixed anything, because it gave his hands something to do while his mind searched for the right words. He placed 1 cup in front of her. Clara held it but did not drink. When I wrote to you, she began, I didn't tell you everything. Ben remained quiet. I told you I wanted a new beginning. She looked at the steam rising from the cup. But I didn't tell you that I was trying to escape an old one. The room seemed smaller. The wind pushed against the walls. Clara took a slow breath. Before Tennessee became a place I couldn't stay anymore, there was a man named Thomas Bell. Ben listened. He was kind at first. Her fingers tightened around the cup. He knew how to say the things people want to hear. A long pause followed. He promised we would build a life together. Ben lowered his eyes. He understood promises. He understood how heavy they could become. But when my life became difficult, Clara continued, when I needed someone to stand beside me instead of just speak beside me, her voice became quieter. He left. The fire shifted in the stove. Clara looked toward the window. I had spent my whole life believing that if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, if I gave enough of myself, people would choose to stay. She looked at the old cloth, but I learned that some people only love the easy parts of a person. Ben did not interrupt. He knew better. Some wounds closed only after they were finally allowed to breathe. The cloth belonged to my baby. The words came softly. Ben's expression changed, but he said nothing. Clara looked down. I lost that child before I ever had the chance to hold a future. Her hand rested over the small piece of fabric. I kept this because it was the only thing I had left. The room went still. No dramatic words, no sudden promises. Only two people sitting across from each other, carrying things they had hidden for years. Ben finally spoke. Clara, she looked up. You thought I would see you differently. It was not a question. She did not answer, because he was right. Ben leaned forward slightly. You thought if I knew, I would think you came here because you had nowhere else to go. Her eyes filled, but she held herself together. Didn't I? The question was almost a whisper. Ben looked at her for a long moment. No. The answer came immediately. You came here because you were trying to survive. He paused. There's a difference. Clara looked away. The tears came quietly this time, not like the ones in the church. Those had been fear. These were exhaustion. Ben did not tell her not to cry. He did not tell her everything would magically be fine. He simply remained there. After a while, he spoke. You should have never had to beg someone to choose you. Clara closed her eyes. For years, she had expected judgment. She had expected questions. She had expected someone to ask what she had done wrong. But Ben asked what had been done to her. That difference mattered. Outside, the storm slowly moved east. But there was another storm waiting to be faced, because the next morning, before the mud on the roads had even dried, a black carriage arrived at Carter Ranch. Walter Grayson stepped down holding a leather folder. He was dressed better than most men in Bitter Creek. His coat was expensive, his boots were spotless. He looked around the ranch as if he was already imagining owning it. Ben walked toward the gate. What brings you here, Walter? Grayson opened the folder. I came to discuss the water rights on the eastern side of your property. Ben's expression hardened. What about them? Walter removed several papers. The county records show a disagreement. Clara watched from the porch. Something about the way Walter held those papers bothered her. Not the documents themselves, the confidence behind them. I believe, Walter said, it would be easier for everyone if you considered selling. Ben looked at him. And if I don't? Walter closed the folder. Then you'll find out how difficult it is to fight a losing battle. The carriage rolled away shortly afterward. Ben remained standing near the gate. Clara stepped beside him. Those papers. Ben looked at her. What? They weren't meant to prove something. She glanced toward the road where Walter disappeared. They were meant to scare you. For the first time, Ben looked at her not as someone he needed to protect, but as someone standing beside him. And he knew the quiet days at Carter Ranch were over. For most of his life, Benjamin Carter had handled problems the same way. He faced them alone, a broken fence post, a sick horse, a winter storm cutting off the road to town. He fixed what he could fix, carried what he could carry, and kept the rest buried where nobody could see it. But Clara was different. She did not stand behind him. She did not wait for him to solve every problem. She stood beside him. And that changed everything. The days after Walter Grayson's visit were filled with quiet tension. The ranch continued moving as it always had. The horses still needed feeding. The fences still needed checking. The morning coffee still sat on the kitchen table before sunrise. But something had shifted. Ben spent more time studying the documents Walter had left behind. The papers claimed that the water rights connected to the eastern section of Carter Ranch were uncertain. If the claim held, Ben could lose access to the creek that supplied the cattle during the dry months. Without that water, the ranch would slowly become impossible to maintain. Samuel watched his brother read the same pages night after night. "You know he wants you worried," Samuel said one evening. Ben looked up from the desk. "Worry doesn't change the facts," No, Samuel leaned against the doorway. "But pretending you don't need help doesn't change them either." Ben looked toward the kitchen. Clara was sitting near the window, carefully repairing a torn work shirt. She had heard them, but she kept sewing. A few weeks earlier, Samuel might have mistaken that silence for weakness. Now he was beginning to understand. Clara listened before she spoke, and when she did speak, people usually remembered it. The next morning, Clara placed a small stack of papers beside Ben's breakfast plate. He looked at them. "What are these?" "Receipts." Ben picked up the first page. They were old purchase records from the ranch store in Bitter Creek. Feed deliveries, tools, fence supplies. "I was looking through the household accounts," Clara explained. "I noticed something." Ben studied the papers. "What? The dates?" She pointed to a line. "This delivery was recorded after the land agreement Walter mentioned." Ben frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone changed the order of events." Ben looked closer. Clara continued. "These papers don't prove everything, but they suggest the records may not be as honest as Walter wants everyone to believe." For a moment, Ben said nothing. Not because he doubted her, because he was realizing something. The woman who arrived at his ranch carrying one suitcase had not come here empty-handed. She had brought experience, patience, a sharp mind hidden beneath quiet manners. "You noticed this from a few receipts?" Clara shrugged slightly. "I spent years keeping track of other people's lives. Medicine, payments, supplies. When someone is sick, a small mistake can become a big problem." Ben looked at her. There was no pride in her voice, only truth. Later that day, Ben rode into Bitter Creek with Clara beside him. The town changed when they arrived. Conversations became quieter. People looked up from the general store. Some watched with curiosity. Others looked away, Clara noticed. Ben noticed that she noticed. "You can stay in the wagon if you want," he said. She turned toward him. "Why? The town can be unkind." Clara adjusted the collar of her coat. "So can the world." She stepped down from the wagon. "But I can't spend my life standing outside every door." Those words stayed with Ben. They walked to Elias Turner's office near the courthouse. The building was small, with a wooden sign hanging above the entrance. Elias was a thin man with silver hair and reading glasses who had spent 20 years helping ranchers settle disputes. He studied Walter's documents carefully, then he looked at Clara. "Where did you learn to examine records like this?" She answered simply, "I learned because I had to." Elias nodded. Sometimes that was the strongest answer a person could give. After several hours, Elias found something. A missing county stamp, an incorrect date, a transfer record that did not match the original filing. "This is enough to ask questions," Elias said. Ben exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. But outside the office, Walter Grayson was already waiting. He stood near the courthouse steps. His expression was calm, almost too calm. "I see your wife has become involved." Ben stepped forward. "She has a name." Walter looked at Clara. "I suppose she does." Clara said nothing. She simply held his gaze. Walter smiled faintly. "You think paperwork will change how things work out here?" "No," Clara replied. Her voice was steady. "But the truth usually has a way of lasting longer than a lie." For a moment, even Walter had no answer. That evening, the town meeting was announced. Everyone knew what it meant. The future of Carter Ranch would be discussed in front of the entire community. Ben expected to stand alone, but when he entered the wooden meeting hall, Clara walked beside him. Not behind, not several steps away, beside him. And for the first time, the people of Bitter Creek saw something different. Not a cowboy defending a woman, not a woman depending on a cowboy. Two people fighting for the same home. The meeting began under the dim light of oil lamps. Walter placed his documents on the table. He spoke confidently. He expected the room to follow him. Then Clara stepped forward. The woman who once cried in a church because she feared being abandoned now stood in front of the whole town, and she was no longer asking anyone to choose her. She was choosing herself. The wooden meeting hall in Bitter Creek had never felt so quiet. The oil lamps hanging from the ceiling flickered softly, casting shadows across the faces of the townspeople gathered inside. Outside, the Colorado wind moved through the streets, carrying the sound of horses shifting near the hitching posts. Inside, every eye was on Clara Whitmore. A few months earlier, she had arrived in town carrying one worn suitcase and a heart full of unanswered questions. Now she stood in the center of the room, holding a stack of papers that could decide the future of Carter Ranch. Walter Grayson leaned against the table, confident as ever. He looked at the crowd. "These records are he said. "Land matters are not something everyone understands." His eyes briefly moved toward Clara. The meaning was clear, but Clara did not lower her gaze. She opened the folder Elias Turner had prepared. "The original water agreement was filed in 1878, she said calmly. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The document Walter presented shows a different filing date. It also carries a county stamp that was not used until 2 years later." A murmur moved through the room. Walter straightened. "That is a serious accusation." Clara looked at him. No accusation. She placed the paper on the table. "Just a question that deserves an honest answer." Elias Turner stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and examined the documents again. "The woman is right." The room became still. Elias rarely spoke without certainty. "I checked the county records this afternoon. These papers do not match the original copies." Walter's expression changed, only slightly, but Ben noticed. Ben had spent years reading cattle, horses, and weather. He knew when something shifted, and something had shifted. For the first time, Walter Grayson was no longer controlling the room. "I suppose everyone here will believe a stranger before someone who has lived in this valley his whole life," Walter said. The words were aimed at Clara, trying to make her feel like she did not belong. But before Ben could answer, another voice came from the back of the room. Samuel Carter stepped forward. "I used to think the same thing." Everyone looked at him. Samuel removed his hat. His expression was serious. "I thought Clara came here because she needed my brother's name. I thought she was bringing problems to this ranch." He glanced at Clara, but I was wrong. Clara said nothing. Samuel continued. "She never asked us to feel sorry for her. She never asked anyone to give her a place." He looked around the room. She worked for it. The silence afterward felt different, not empty, respectful. Ben watched his brother carefully. A few months ago, Samuel would never have spoken those words. Now he was standing beside the woman he once doubted. The meeting continued for another hour. By the end of it, Elias Turner had enough evidence to challenge Walter's claim through the proper county channels. Walter gathered his papers slowly. Before leaving, he stopped near Clara. "You think this settles everything?" Clara looked at him. "I think the truth has a longer road than a lie." Walter studied her for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Your past will catch up with you eventually." Ben stepped closer, not threatening, not angry, simply present. Walter looked at him, then walked out. The door closed behind him, but his final words remained. "Your past will catch up with you." That night, Carter Ranch was quiet again. The same wooden walls, the same kitchen table, the same stove warming the room. But everything felt different. Clara sat near the window, looking out at the dark fields. Ben placed 2 cups of coffee on their table. He sat across from her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ben said, "You know you don't have to prove anything to people who decided not to see you." Clara looked at him. "I spent most of my life trying to prove I was worth staying for." Her voice was soft. Ben lowered his eyes. "You shouldn't have had to." A small silence followed, the kind that no longer felt lonely. The next morning, Elias Turner arrived at the ranch with another envelope. Ben opened it near the porch. His expression changed as he read. Clara noticed. "What is it?" Ben looked at her. "It's about Thomas Bell," the name she had not heard spoken aloud in months, the name connected to the old cloth, the old letter, the old wound. Elias had discovered something. Thomas had not simply walked away. There had been another reason, a hidden agreement. A family decision made years earlier. A secret that had forced Clara out of Tennessee with more pain than she ever told anyone. Ben folded the letter carefully. He looked toward the mountains, then back at Clara. "We should know the truth." Clara held the envelope but did not open it. For once, she was not afraid of what was written inside. Because she was no longer standing alone, and whatever waited in those pages, she would face it with someone beside her. Maybe you've known a moment like Clara's, standing at the edge of a new beginning, carrying memories that nobody else could see. Maybe you've wondered if the pieces of your past were too heavy for someone else to accept. But sometimes, the right person does not ask you to leave those pieces behind. They simply sit beside you and help you carry them. Clara and Ben's story was never about two people who had perfect lives. It was about two hearts that had been weathered by loss, yet still found the courage to trust again. A second chance did not arrive with grand promises or easy answers. It came through small moments, a warm cup of coffee, a hand offered without hesitation, and someone choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. If you had been Clara, would you have found the courage to open your heart again? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. And if this story touched something inside you, we invite you to stay with us. More tales of love, resilience, hidden truths, and healing from the old American frontier are waiting in the stories ahead. Until then, may you always find someone who sees your heart, not just your scars.